everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started now. So I'm Dr. Erin Hennessy. I am co-chair of the seminar series with Dr. Chris Peters. And today we have our postdoctoral scholars. I just wanted to make one quick announcement, especially for those who are live streaming this. We are actually going to cut off their recording during the last presentation for Dr. Eleanor Shonkoff. So that will not come over to you, and I ask that you not take pictures during that time either. She has some proprietary information to share, so we will just keep it protected for now. So we'll turn it over to Dr. Sarah Folter, who will introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you all for being here. This is the second of the postdoctoral forums. We did one a couple years ago. I'm Sarah Folter, as Erin mentioned. I am the doctoral and postdoctoral officer here at the Friedman School. Very much enjoy getting to hear all of their work, and I think this is a really nice opportunity to showcase that to the rest of you as well. One thing to keep in mind is that we have a range of postdocs, one who's brand new within a month of joining us, and a few others who are well on their way to their next big career move. So you'll see that in this range of presentations where they may be talking about what they will do versus actually having results. So the format again is lightning talks, so they'll talk for about 6 to 7 minutes. We'll take 1 or 2 questions for each of them and then move on to the next one. If we have time at the end, we may have additional questions, but we want to kind of keep it moving and make sure everyone has enough time. So with that, we'll introduce the first speaker, which is Heidi Lai, who is working with Dare Mozaffarian, and she will tell you more about herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heidi Lai. Long life story short, I was born in Hong Kong, and I've lived and studied in 4 different countries. And I spent the last 8 years in the UK, and I completed my higher education there, including my PhD in food science and nutrition at the University of Leeds in 2016. And the topic of my dissertation was dietary sources of polyphenols and the risk of cardiovascular disease in the United Kingdom. And right, this is just minor entertainment. This is the photo that my friend took when I finished my 300-page thesis. I think this is the time where I looked the most happy after 1 year of depression. So if you're currently doing a PhD, there's hope. So right now, I'm a postdoctoral fellow working for Dean Mozaffarian, and I've been working on investigations looking at biomarkers and the associations with chronic disease in the cardiovascular health study, and also in the Fatty Acids and Outcomes Research Consortium. So today I will be focusing my talk on omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids and healthy aging. Overall, life expectancy, as you know, has increased over the years. This is resulting in an expanding older adult population. Unfortunately, the years we spent living in disability and disease is also increasing, and this will eventually increase our financial burden as well as the US nation's financial burden. And omega-3 PUFAs, they are found in seafood and plants, and we know that they exert favorable physiological effects on certain diseases, but their association is not well established with healthy aging. And traditionally, in observational studies, we tend to estimate their levels using self-report diets, such as food frequency questionnaires, but biomarkers offer a more objective alternative, and that's less prone to measurement errors. And studies also tend to only estimate intakes one time at baseline, instead of taking repeated measurements. So the study objective was to look at the longitudinal association between serial biomarker measures of omega-3s and healthy aging. So I did this investigation in the cardiovascular health study, which is a multi-center prospective older adult cohort. At baseline, we identified about 2,600 adults with healthy aging, with a mean age of 74 years old. And we measured N3 PUFA levels 3 times at baseline, year 6 and year 13. Because we have assumptions that omega-3 PUFAs, they exert beneficial effects over the lifetime, and these effects can be accumulated. And also, the most recent measure is most likely to be the most influential. We calculated the cumulative average. And this is calculated by taking the average of the current and prior measurements at each time point, and then assigning a 50% weight to the most current measurement and equal weighting to the prior measurements. Healthy aging in this study is a binary outcome, and it's defined as living until death free from chronic diseases, such as CVD, cancer, lung disease, kidney disease, cognitive and physical dysfunction. We used the Cox proportional hazards model to report the association between N3 PUFAs and unhealthy aging. And the time at risk was to the first unhealthy aging event if participants died of other causes not defined in this definition. They were censored, and if they were still alive, they were followed up until the latest adjudicated date in 2015. The maximum follow-up for these adults were 22 years. The key findings in this study were seafood-derived N3 PUFAs, both in combination as EPA, DPA, and DHA, as well as individually, but not plant-derived ALA, was associated with a lower risk of unhealthy aging. Results here report the hazard ratio and 95% confidence intervals for the association between each of the fatty acids and unhealthy aging. So per interquintile range, after multivariable and diet adjustments, higher levels of EPA, DPA, and in combination were each associated with between 15 to 18% lower risk of unhealthy aging. So, in conclusion, older adults mean age 74 years at baseline, high cumulative levels of circulating seafood-derived N3 PUFAs in combination and individually, but not plant-derived ALA, was associated with a higher likelihood of healthy aging. Implications of this study includes supporting guidelines for increased fish intake and possibly supplements too, because what we measure is actually plasma phospholipids, so what has already been absorbed in the body. And both fish intake and supplements can contribute to that. It also supports biologic studies on long-chain N3 PUFAs, which exhibit beneficial roles in healthy aging among the oldest old. And if I were to continue my investigation, I would probably look at changes in N3 PUFA levels to see if someone had a low intake and they changed their intake in a short period of time, if that's going to affect the risk estimate. I can also look at the clinical relevance by looking at years of life lost or gain as an alternative outcome other than a binary healthy aging outcome. And I would just like to briefly acknowledge Dean Mossafarian and all of my co-authors, my colleagues here and in the University of Washington, as well as the funding Dean Mossafarian obtained. Thank you.
We can take a couple questions for Heidi.
Was there any difference in your findings if you look at the younger adults as opposed to the older adults? It just seems that with a mean age of 74, that the older adults have already aged really well. I was just wondering if there was a protection effect.
In this particular cohort, all the adults that entered were aged 65 and above. So we were not able to look at younger adults.
And how about 65 and 75 as opposed to older?
If you look at those, then the follow-up time would be too short, so I didn't look at that. Yeah. And we also want to utilize the serial measures as well. So if you were to look at adults between a certain age, you could only study the association from baseline and follow up for 5 years. So it would be much more meaningful to look at repeated measures, because these levels tend to change over time as we change our diet or change our habits. So it's more interesting to look at that.
If you look at ratios, omega-3 to 6 to 9, as opposed to just DHA.
No, I didn't. But do you mind if I ask what the rationale is?
With regard to synthesis of omega-3s and 6, there's competition, and the absolute level of the omega-3s may be less important than their relative ratio to others when we talk about inflammatory pathways, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Yujin Lee, who also works with Dean Mozafarian.
Hello. Today I'm going to talk about one of the projects that I have been working on, cost effectiveness of financial incentives for improving diet through Medicare and Medicaid. Before talking about the project, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Yujin Lee, born in South Korea, where the Winter Olympic is underway. And I got my PhD from Penn State University, where I studied the effects of dark chocolate and almonds on cardiovascular risk factors. And I joined Dean Mozafarian's research group in January last year, and I'm currently working on 2 projects. And today I'm going to talk about the economic analysis of nutrition policy through Medicare and Medicaid. This figure shows the annual growth of Medicare and Medicaid spending. As you can see, the spending has been increased since 2009, and in 2015, the Medicare and Medicaid spending constitute the 37% of national health expenditure. So financial incentive has been implemented through the government insurance program to promote health. However, dietary component has not been included as an effective strategy to promote health. To acknowledge these gaps in knowledge, the aim of the study to investigate the cardiometabolic health and economic impacts of a financial incentive program to incentivize healthy food through Medicare and Medicaid using a validated microsimulation model. We propose a policy scenario, which is a 20% subsidy on healthy food, including fruits, vegetables, whole grain, nuts and seeds, fish and seafood, and plant-based oil through Medicare and Medicaid programs. The logic pathway linking healthy food incentive to change in qualities and healthcare costs is shown here. As you can see, the Medicare and Medicaid incentive program, we subsidize 20% of purchases of healthy full food, and which will change probably equivalent to the reduce the 20% of price of healthy food. So the change in price of healthy food would increase the intake of healthy food, and the estimate was based on the published meta-analysis evaluating the effect of price changes on the consumption of healthy food. The change of healthy food intake may change the CMD outcomes, and the estimates were derived from the published meta-analysis evaluating the etiologic effect of healthy food on the incidence of coronary heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. So a validated microsimulation model incorporated those estimates and predicted the changes in CVD cases, deaths, and type 2 diabetes cases, and we estimated the changes in healthcare costs and quality adjusted life years. So when we comparing the intervention or policies, willingness to pay was based on the incremental cost effectiveness ratio, which is called ICER. So the upper threshold of ICER is $115,000 per quality, and low threshold of ICER is $50,000 per quality. So the upper ratio and low ratio indicates that if this policy or program is worthwhile or acceptable. The preliminary results is shown here. This graph is showing the 5, 10, 20 years and lifetime projected incremental cost effectiveness ratio due to the 20% subsidy on healthy food. X-axis represents the different time horizons and Y-axis represents the ICER. So as you can see, the different color represents insurance program and the black line represents the overall population including Medicare and Medicaid. At 5 years, all the ICERs were below the upper threshold $150,000 per QALY, and at 10 years, 20 years, and lifetime, all ICERs were below the lower threshold, which is $50,000 per QALY. So these results indicate that the proposed policy was cost effective. So the analysis is ongoing. We are also still testing the higher, the subsidy rate, which is a 30%, and we're also doing the subgroup analysis using the race, education, and income level. So the analysis is ongoing. So we hopefully publish this results to the journal in the next couple of months. So I would like to acknowledge the investigator of the project and the collaborator in Harvard group and also in the University of Liverpool. And this research was supported by NIH, and the PI of the grant is Dr. Renata Mija. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your nice talk. This isn't directly related to your analysis per se, but I just wondered if you could speculate on the feasibility of implementing something like this in the real world.
Yes. I think we still undergoing the analysis, but when we compare this ICER with the other clinical trial, like a cost effectiveness of drug trial, which is a statin or other potential drug can reduce the CVD outcome. When we compare the statin, our program showed the lower ICER, which is more cost effective. So I think that this, we propose this policy and definitely is feasible in terms of the cost effectiveness. And if the policymaker would consider this as an effective strategy to reduce the CVD burdens and also diabetes burden, I think that this policy would reduce a lot of burden in the United States.
Would the inverse hold true? I mean, you didn't make healthy food cheaper, but you made poor food choices more expensive by eliminating subsidies for them, for example. Would you see the same trend?
Oh, that's a very good question. And the next presenter will talk about very similar approach. And that will be very interesting story for the next presenter. Very good question.
Great. Thank you, Yuka.
Thank you.
We have them in a certain order for a reason. Next up is Juju Liu, and she also works with Dean Mozaffarian.
Hello, everybody. Hello, people on live. So, thank you so much for coming. I very appreciate this fantastic platform to share our research. My name is Junshu Liu. I go by Juju. I graduated from the University of South Carolina in 2016. My major is epidemiology. Right after, I'm very fortunate to be the mentee of Dr. Mozaffarian. So now, today, I will present the research on cost effectiveness of financial incentives and the disincentives to improve diet and health through the platform of supplemental nutrition and assistance program. So this is part of the food price investigators. This is a collaborative work between Tufts and Brigham Women's Hospital. So the the leading work from Tufts, Dr. Mozafarian, the leading PI from Brigham Women's Hospital is Tom Gaziano. So we know that diet is contributing more than 50% of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and the health care cost of all obesity-related conditions is about % of gross domestic product, which is approximately $1.42 trillion per year. And worstly, the diet-related diseases at cost disproportionately affect low-income individuals. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is the largest food assistance program in the U.S. And also the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program provides monthly benefit for retail food purchases to approximately 42 million low-income individuals, which is 1 in every 7 Americans. The potential impact of supplemental nutrition programs are staggering, with an annual budget of $16 billion per year, which exceeds the combined budget of National Health Institute, Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, and the Food Drug Agency. Here we propose 3 policy intervention scenarios. The first one is 30% subsidy on first vegetables purchase. The second one is upon the first one, we have the restriction on sugar-sweetened beverages. The third one is a broad, we call it SNAP Plus, which is a broad categories of healthy food and broad categories of unhealthy food. For the healthy food, we include first vegetables, whole grains, seafood, plant-based oils, and nuts and seeds. For the unhealthy food, we include sugar-sweetened beverages, junk food, and also processed meat. Therefore, the aim of our study is to estimate the cost-effectiveness of 3 policy intervention scenarios to improve diet and reduce CVD and diabetes among SNAP population over a short, medium, long term, which is 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and a lifetime. In addition, we're also interested to see population heterogeneity by age, gender, race, and education. Here, I have very, very simplified version of micro-simulation models, how it works. Hopefully, here, it can give you an idea how this model works. Basically, we take the population from 2009 to 2014, which is from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey for SNAP participants at age 35 years to 80 years. For each, this model is for individual levels. For each individual, we will go through these models across four scenarios, including non-intervention at our scenario 1, 2, and 3. For each person who goes through this process, their risk of chronic disease, which is cardiovascular disease and diabetes, will change their risk of developing those diseases. For each person, this model is updated annually. If this person is alive at the end of this 1 year, this person will go into this model again, go through this process again. If this person died at the end of 1 year, this person will be out of this model. And then this model will run 1,000 million times until everybody is dead or reach 100 years, and then this model will be closed. After this model closed, we will summarize our outcome of metrics, which we are very interested, the number of diseases averted, which is total CVD averted, total diabetes averted, and total CVD averted over the 5 years, 20 years lifetime. Another very interesting outcome we are interested in is the quality adjusted life years. We want to compare intervention scenarios with no intervention scenarios. We want to know how much quality of adjusted life years gained. the central measures of cost effectiveness analysis is incremental cost effectiveness ratios, which is measured as the difference in cost divided by difference in the qualities. The difference means the intervention scenarios versus non-intervention scenarios. Due to the time limits, I only present 2 slides of the outcome. Here, I presented here is total CVD cases averted, total CVD deaths averted. I don't know why it missed up here, I'm sorry. So you can see from here, we have 3 intervention scenarios. First, vegetable subsidy 30% at the plus SSD restriction. For the third one is SNAP plus broad categories of healthy food and unhealthy food. So over the 5-year, 10-year, 20 years lifetime, we can see the number of disease averted is increasing over time. And also, across the 3 different scenarios, the SNAP plus have the largest cases averted. This work has very great implications implementing in the US. We see that the SNAP provides the most promising opportunities to improve the food choices and health while reducing the cost and the disparities, and also incorporating financial incentives for healthier food and disincentives for altered eligibility for unhealthy food into the current SNAP package would generate significant health gains and also health cost savings. Thank you. Thank you for this great question. So let me repeat your questions to make sure I understand your questions. You're asking if we have a subsidy for the healthy food, we will increase the price of the food items? Mm-hmm. I think this is a great question. I understand your question now. I think this is the purpose of how our works to demonstrate to people, to the general public, to the policymakers, how these things can work out through the platform of Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You can tell that from fruits and vegetables, we have the policy cost. We also have a healthcare cost. We will calculate the cost corresponding to healthcare, cost corresponding to food subsidies. We also have the cost corresponding to other scenarios. Actually, at the end of the day, I did not show the results over here. Maybe my mentor can complement my my presentation. Actually, especially for the SNAP Plus scenarios, we have the negative. Actually, we do not pay the money. The government will receive the money because of the disincentivize on unhealthy food. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, and switching topics a bit, next up is Alexandra Thorne, who works with Chris Peters.
All right, great to be here. Everybody can hear me? Okay, whoa. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about my work with Chris Peters on the ruminant meat supply chain project. But first, a little bit of introduction on my own background. For my dissertation was in biology, and I was specifically working on a model for how resources are moved in plants and how this is constrained by the vascular connections between individual roots and individual branches. I was then hired by University of New Hampshire to work with an existing forest ecosystem model called PNET, which simulates photosynthesis and productivity, and applying it to non-forest ecosystems, including grasslands. And then also at UNH, I did a very different type of modeling, which is closer to what I'm talking to you about today, spatial modeling of land cover change. So this is for a scenarios project where we were developing some alternative futures for how land cover might change from forest, either agriculture or developed land in the state of New Hampshire. In order to do this project, I used a type of regression model called regression trees. So instead of fitting a curve to the data, regression trees use look for the natural partition in the data. So for example, to look at the model for where land changed from forest to agriculture in New Hampshire, the first input variable that was detected as statistically significant was farmland class, which then divided the data into two categories based on whether it was in either prime agricultural land or farmland of statewide importance versus not being in those categories. And then for the all others category, there was a second partition based on elevation. And then the response variable was the probability of land conversion, forest to agriculture. So this then fed nicely into my work with Chris, which is part of a project looking at capacity to expand production of ruminant meat in our region, in New England and New York State. And so I was looking at the biological production capacity, which then feed into economic models. So the key questions that I was addressing were, first, what land is most suitable for pasture and hay? How large is the current land base? How much land is currently used for those? What is the theoretical productivity for each acre? And then based on the combination of where the land is and how productive it is, what is the theoretical production and how is it spatially distributed? So looking first at the model for the distribution of just farmland, the overall patterns were that land was, the best predictors of where the farmland was were either the productivity index or land capability classes defined by USDA, and specifically that 82% of current farmland falls into the top 3 capability classes out of 8. And then based on this model, you're then able to put together a map of what land is most suitable. So this is the map. Darker colors are, the darkest colors are 40% likely to have farmland on them. So you see a lot in New York, in the Finger Lakes region, and then throughout the region in low-lying and river valleys. I then looked within farmland for where the pasture and hay was. So this is sort of the opposite pattern because pasture and hay is lower quality farmland. I'm going to apologize in advance for this map because the color scheme, it has the lighter color for the more likely to be pasture and hay. So it's kind of color reversed with the white background. But the overall pattern was that pasture and hay was on land with lower productivity index, more limited land capability classes, and higher slope. So then this is the map. It looks similar to the previous map. In this case, the colored pixels, and again, I apologize for not being able to see exactly where the hay is very, very easily, are the land that was in 2016 actually in the farmland categories. So then to look at just kind of an overall picture of what the land base looks like, this table summarizes the breakdown of land categories within the region. Most of it's not farmland, got 66% forest, but then 12% farmland at the bottom. It falls in various categories. This is based on 2016 data. This is based on remotely sensed data. So there's variability from year to year, which is partly due to crop rotations and partly due to differences in how they modeled the analysis from year to year. So we also looked at variability. So we looked for the years 2010 to 2016, what was the dominant land use for each piece of land. And the result is that for a third of the land base, it was pasture and hay for all 7 years. And then if you include lands that were in pasture and hay for most years, it was just over half. And then the final piece was modeling yield. The soils database includes estimates of yield for a variety of crops, including pasture and hay. However, it doesn't include it for every single piece of land you might want to look at. So I use a statistical model to take other variables that are provided and build a model of pasture productivity for a larger number of the pixels. So got a model. This is based on ordinary least squares regression that explain half of the variability. And then you combine that with the land cover map and get an estimate of productivity within the region. And with that, thank you.
Less time for questions. There is one. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next is Graham Jeffries. He's our newest postdoc, has only been a postdoc. He's been a doctoral student here, but now on board as a postdoc for a short time, and he'll tell us the work he will be doing. Works with Tim Griffin.
Hi everyone, I'm Graham Jeffries. I'm a data scientist and a postdoc here at the Friedman, working with Tim, Sally Thompson at UC Berkeley, and Avery Cohn over at the Fletcher School. And this is work that's funded by the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center. The overarching goal of our project is to quantify the climate regulation services of maintaining forests and the benefits that provides to agricultural lands in central and northern Brazil. And the goal of the project is to inform forest and agricultural policy in central Brazil. I've been interested in agriculture and food for many years. I've approached it through a range of different lenses, initially through philosophy and ethics, trying to map ethical frameworks onto a kind of a logical sequence that would allow you to deduce what the kind of ideal or optimal diet would be given that ethical framework, but finding those tools in philosophy somewhat limited for capturing the complexities of food and agricultural systems, I found myself gravitating more towards quantitative tools and geospatial analysis and so forth. In my undergraduate thesis, I estimated the agricultural carrying capacity of the state of Massachusetts, mapping potential food distribution channels. And that work brought me here for my master's, working with Tim and Chris Peters as well on regional food system, local food system modeling efforts. I transitioned into the PhD program here and completed my dissertation in about a month ago. And that work was principally focused on modeling and mapping crop yields using remote sensing imagery, both in Brazil and in the United States in the Midwest. My postdoctoral focus is on specifically modeling the climate and crop yield linkages in this kind of agroforestry and climate system. And the kind of big picture of my work generally is around how can we best leverage this deluge of data coming from satellites, tractors with sensors, and environmental monitoring systems in order to inform strategies for enhancing the triple bottom line of agriculture. So not just farm viability outcomes, but also environmental and social outcomes. The work that I'll be doing in my postdoc is, again, focused in Brazil, and you may know in the past 30 years, Brazil has risen to become an agricultural superpower, largely through its soybean exports, principally to China in the form of soy oil and meal. This has led to a massive transformation of the agricultural landscape in Brazil, controversially, largely through deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon and conversion of grasslands in the central Brazil. And this has successfully boosted crop production overall, but has introduced unexpected feedbacks because the environmental and climate regulation services that forests provide have been disrupted. What I mean by that is the removal of forests have increased surface temperatures because there's less transpiration that happens at a regional scale, and they've also disrupted precipitation patterns, which the agriculture depends on. More than 95% of the commodity cropping in Brazil is rain-fed. And so there's this feedback loop between land use change, changes in interannual climate variability, and then negative impacts on crop production. However, these are intermediated by potential for farmers to adapt to changing climate conditions. However, this adaptive capacity of farmers to change their planting patterns, the varieties and timings of those plantings isn't well understood. So while we're trying to inform optimal kind of forest and agriculture policy in Brazil, but there's a kind of a key central question to address, which is to what degree can farm adaptation in the form of planting dates, for example, protect against the climate changes, regional climate changes that are driven by changing land cover. And you might be saying to me, well, great, we'll pull together the panel data for the last 30 years that has crop yields and planting dates and climatology and just fit some nice models, and then we have our result. Well, fortunately, the data doesn't exist, especially not on that time span. And so we turn to alternative sources for creating this, or creating good proxies for variables over time. And we do this using remote sensing imagery. Satellite imagery that dates back to the 70s, that is a gridded product that can allow us to discern how healthy vegetation at a given location is. And we use this for a handful of applications, the first of which is mapping land cover, what type of crop is located at a particular point at a particular period of time, identifying where forests are located and subsequently deforested. We use this remote sensing imagery to model crop yields themselves by developing statistical models that relate the intensity of greenness that's observed from the satellites to a yield outcome at the end of the season. This image is emblematic of some of the outcomes from my dissertation, representing the relative soy yield for individual fields within a major production center in Brazil. And then finally, we're developing novel methods which use a machine learning and an empirical model inversion strategy that combines remote sensing to estimate planting dates. In essence, you can look at the curve of greenness as crops emerge and become healthier and identify the specific point in time when they are moving out of their planting phase to emergence. And so we hope that this will kind of inform this big picture question about how regional or physical climate change that's driven by land use change will affect farm productivity and ultimately profitability as well. We would like to see how well or how inadequately global trade models might capture the farm adaptive capacity to respond to shifting climate. We believe that they are overestimating the potential of adaptive capacity because their model of adaptation is based on largely temperate agricultural systems. And then finally, the big picture question is, what is the optimal balance between forests and farms given kind of economic incentives and desired ecological outcomes? And so I'll be exploring these questions and others over the course of the next year in my postdoc. And look forward to sharing the results with you.
Questions for Grant?
Thanks for your talk. I'm wondering if you worry at all with this sort of research that increasing the probability of these fires due to climate change, more deforestation later.
Yeah, I think that that's a critical concern. I think I just lost my mic. And I think part of the goal of our work is to really create a richer picture of the interdependence between those forests and the profitability of the farms themselves. In other words, by expanding the footprint of agriculture, farmers are harming other farmers that are in nearby areas because the effect of forest loss is not just present at that same location where forests were, but also in neighboring ranges up to 100 kilometers.
Are you planning to look at any measures beyond greenness, especially with like the data sources that are becoming available, so that you can look at other remotely sensible measures of productivity?
Oh, absolutely. The greenness is just the beginning, and I'm happy to talk more about that. In fact, there's a lot more going on under the hood. And however, to your point, and maybe of general interest, there are all types of new satellite platforms that are becoming available. Spectral aperture radar, for example, that can give a kind of a three-dimensional representation of the Earth's surface. That can actually kind of track the growth of the canopy, the height of the plant over large swaths of land. So that could be informative, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Eleanor Shonkoff, who works with Chris Economos.
Did I turn this on right? Yes? Okay, good. So today I'm going to be talking about what kids eat in the quick serve restaurant setting, what they think about it, and what we can do to help encourage parents to make healthier choices in this setting.